Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Judy Blake. I am a program coordinator for Family to Family Network in Houston, Texas. I'm here joined by my amazing, brilliant, knowledgeable colleague, Leslie Lawson.
Hi, everybody.
Leslie's smiling. She's like, really? So welcome back. This is class number 2 of our special education training, Top Tips for What You Need for Successful ARDs. Just a couple of quick reminders. This is a safe space. We know that there's a lot of information. No question is silly, so feel free to hold your questions and put them in the chat box. And if you don't feel comfortable asking a question, just private message Leslie or myself. If you are Spanish speaking, you can please put it in the chat box, and my translator, the wonderful Myrna, will translate it for me. We hope to finish within about an hour, but we may run over just a little bit. If you would like a copy of this recording or the slides, please email me and I will make sure that you get them. There will be a survey at the end and we need everyone to complete the survey. Got to complete the survey and then I can send you the slides. I'd be happy to. So let's get started. Tip number 1. You know your child better than anyone else, and you have many rights in the special education process. So what we talked about on Monday, and you're going to hear us, talk about that more today, you have to learn your rights. Leslie and I can give you the tools, but you need to make sure that you access those tools and understand them. All students, and this is for public school students and charter schools. I know we have someone on the call whose child goes to a charter school. They are entitled to a free and appropriate education, and that is called FAPE, F-A-P-E. FAPE requires schools to provide that special education, and they must meet the unique needs of your child or loved one. Next slide. So the IDEA manual, this is something we can't share enough with you. You really have to read it, learn it, understand it. It is in both English and Spanish, and it is everything that we do. It's the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And this isn't law that Leslie and I came up with. This isn't just Texas law. This is federal law. And the reason that we have this is to make sure that our public schools and charter schools are serving the educational needs of our students who have disabilities. And I think it's really crucial because if you come to the meeting and you have that IDEA manual with you, the ARD committee sees, oh, they have the IDEA manual with them. They know about it. They've looked at it. And I think that you're considered an equal member of the IEP team. If you're not sure what IEP means, that is Individualized Education Plan. So your child's IEP is what's discussed in those ARD meetings. So there's several people at the ARD meeting from the school district. They can be the speech therapist, the special education chairperson, your child's teacher, someone from the general ed curriculum. Tip number 3.
It was kind of what you were talking about.
Exactly. Thank you. Got a little ahead of myself there. So the IEP, that is that centerpiece, that cornerstone of federal legislation regarding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's important to remember that the goal of that IEP is to prepare your loved one for employment, independent living, and further education. Now, you may think to yourself, I don't think my child's going to go on for further education. That's okay, but the school must still try to prepare them for it. So you have to think of that IEP as a contract. It's between you and the school. And just like any contract that you sign, you have to understand it. Because if you don't understand it, how can you really sign it and agree to it? So the question, how does the IEP apply on an elementary school age student? It applies just like with any student. You are signing that contract on behalf of your loved one. And is the ARD contract the only copy the school provides? I'm not sure what you mean there, so hold off on that, and we might be covering that at some point. Oh, the difference between the ARD and the IEP. So the ARD stands for Admission, Review, Dismissal. So we call them ARD meetings. The IEP is the actual plan. That is the document regarding your child that includes the supports and services they will need, their present levels of academic performance. It will document what the meeting minutes were in that ARD document. And yes, the IEP can include behavior implementation amendments. No worries that you don't know the terminology. That's why we're doing this. And I'm happy to send you the recording if you would like, if I haven't already. So like I said, IEP, you must understand what it is that you're signing. But that stands for Individualized Education Plan. So the IEP that was for my son, Ryan, who is 27 years old, would be different than Leslie's IEP for her son, Cameron. IEPs are individualized. Next slide. Go ahead, Leslie.
If
Sure.
you've had an ARD meeting and you don't have a copy of your child's IEP, that's a big problem.
Yes.
You should be given a copy. I would not sign agree until I've read every page of it. So it's really important. And I talk to so many parents that don't know what's in their child's IEP. So you wouldn't sign a bank loan at the bank if you didn't know what the terms of the loan were. So don't sign the IEP unless you understand everything that's in there and get a copy of it. That's really important.
And we can touch base with you about this after, if you would like. We'd be happy to. Tip number 4, what should you do before your ARD/IEP meeting? So in Texas, this is what we call them, IEP meetings, but everywhere else, they're called ARD meetings. And ARD
is the opposite.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. Don't mind me. Wednesday. In Texas, we call them ARD meetings, which stands for Admission, Review, Dismissal. Everywhere else in the country, they're called IEP meetings. So you want to make sure that before your meeting that you are prepared. You want to get copies of evaluations. Find out where your child is at. What are the goals and objectives that are going to be discussed? You mentioned about the behavior plan. Is there one? Are there any accommodations for your child? Any vision, any hearing, speech, occupational therapy? You want to make sure that you read through those documents ahead of time so that you know what people are going to talk about. It's not because you want to rush through the actual meeting, but you want to be prepared so that you're not having to read through it while everyone is at the meeting. It's just being prepared like anything else. So you want to gather that information. And I think it's fair to get that information a few days before your meeting. That way you have a chance to review it, maybe review it with a friend, with your child's father, anyone who is helping you.
Right, and these are all draft documents. They are, nothing is set in stone until you're part of the meeting and decision. So you may say, oh, look at the present levels and say, oh, but my son can do this. And they say that he can't, or vice versa. Or you may have another idea for an IEP goal, or you may think of some other accommodation that would be helpful. So you're a very important member of the ARD committee.
And don't forget that. Tip number 5, evaluation. Know that all services that a child needs are based on that initial evaluation. And that future data collection, those further assessments. So there's that timeline, and we talked about that timeline on Monday. But if you want something additional, there is no timeline for that. There is no deadline. So it's really important that you ask for all evaluations the first go around. You can ask for future ones. It's just that there's no deadline for it. So you want to make sure that it's basically done right the first time. So say you have a child who is going into public school, and maybe they're entering pre-K or kindergarten. And you maybe already know that they're on the autism spectrum, but maybe they were just getting speech therapy. You want to make sure that the school tests them in all areas of suspected disability, because then they have to follow the timeline. But once you have your meeting, and then you say, oh, by the way, can you also evaluate them for occupational therapy? You want to make sure that you did that before rather than waiting, because the school can take their time in evaluating for that occupational therapy.
Judy, another thing I wanted to mention, because it keeps coming up in some of the calls I get, if
Sure.
your child is 5 on or before September 1st, and the school needs to do an evaluation, they should not tell you to keep your child at home until the evaluation is done. If your child's 5 or older, on or before September 1st, they have to allow your child to go to school, even if they haven't done the evaluation yet.
Yeah, and that's, again, this is why we have these training sessions. So in the comments where it says, why is it that during the ARD they review what was discussed and ask for agreement and electronically signed by agreeing? So you should have gotten those documents before the ARD meeting. It's fine to discuss it during the ARD meeting, and if you agree, that's great. But if you don't agree, we're going to be talking about that in detail tomorrow. You can certainly disagree.
They can print out a copy and let you look at it before you agree to something.
Yes, they
you
can.
can even take it home if you want to take it home and go over it with
Absolutely.
your husband or somebody else. So, you don't have to agree if you haven't seen everything. You can take it home, say, I'll bring it back tomorrow after I look at it. It's really important that you don't agree unless you've read every page of the document and understand it and agree with it.
So I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat, which I think is great. Why don't we get through these, because we might be answering some of your questions, and I got some private messages as well. And then we'll be happy to discuss them. Let's just get through the tips, and then we'll by all means answer your questions. So once it comes to meeting time, please make sure that you try not to go alone. We know that sometimes it's hard. You're not going to be able to have the other parent there, but try to bring someone with you. It doesn't have to be an advocate, but try to bring a friend or relative. They can just be a second set of eyes, another pair of ears. Maybe they can make sure you're following the ARD guidelines. Meet with them ahead of time so they know your concerns and that you want to make sure that your questions are addressed. Maybe that person can be in charge of taking notes, following the ARD agenda. You just want that moral support during the meeting. We always encourage parents to work collaboratively with schools. And personally, I think schools are very overwhelmed. I don't think there's enough time for training. I believe that teachers are doing the best that they can. It's just hard because sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And if you're not trained properly, they don't realize they're not trained properly. So we encourage you to work together, but bring that second set of eyes and ears to make sure that everything is being followed properly.
One thing that I would always do is after I looked over all the draft documents to prepare for the meeting, I'd make a list of questions. And I'd have that in front of me. And as I got them answered, I would ask the diagnostician to please document that in the minutes, what the answer was, who, what, when, how is it going to happen, and check it off. And then that way you've got all your questions answered.
And it's been in the ARD minutes. Because
Excuse me.
if something is verbally discussed, that means it possibly didn't happen. It must be documented in the ARD minutes in order for the school to make sure that it happened.
Or somewhere in the IEP.
Exactly.
Excuse me. Miss
Yes.
Judy, Miss Leslie.
Yes, ma'am.
So are y'all saying, say for instance, I call an ARD meeting, and they prepare the IEP ahead of the ARD meeting? And they
Yes.
should send it to me first and then we have the meeting?
Yes.
Okay, it's good to know because that was not happening on my end.
Right.
I'll
Yeah,
have the ARD meeting and then we'll go to the meeting and we'll discuss. And then afterwards, they'll send me a copy of what
Right.
we did at the meeting.
And you need time to look over it. And looking
Okay.
at it at the meeting is not giving you appropriate time.
Well, we don't even look at it at the meeting. I get
Right.
it after
Yep.
the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Travis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to give you draft copies ahead of the meeting unless you ask for that in writing. Okay, we're talking
Have to
about best
ask.
practices, but if you ask for it and they don't give it to you, I personally would not go to a meeting unless I had seen everything, because I can't be an equal member if I don't have all the information they have. So if they don't want to give me draft copies that I've requested in writing before the meeting, then you know what, I'm going to have to reschedule my ARD meeting.
Even
And
though I
that's-
called for the meeting.
That's okay.
Right.
They still have to get
Okay.
it to you. Yep.
Okay.
So,
If there's any new information.
so it's also important to take your child to the meeting. And when they're in high school, when they turn 14, they should be at the ARD meetings. But even when my son was in elementary school and middle school, your child is more than just paper. Let them meet your child so they can put a name with a face with the paperwork and with those documents. They don't have to stay for the whole meeting, but they can certainly introduce themselves, tell them what they like and don't like about school. Let the committee understand your child and get to meet them. And it also prepares them for when they do attend the meetings in high school. So it's something that they'll be used to. Tip number 7, during the meeting, ask questions. This is really important. Remember how we said it's a contract between you and the school? Well, this is about your child, and you are their biggest advocate. So it's important to make sure that you ask questions. Leslie had a great idea. Write down your questions before. What I would do is highlight the documents that I got and then put notes in there. And then I would always make sure that I asked the questions that way. And then I could check it off. But ask the questions that you need. Ask for data to support those decisions that are being made. And if they can't provide the data, then how are they coming up with a plan? So you want to ask those open-ended questions. If you just say, is my child doing okay in math? Well, you're going to get a yes or no answer. But if you maybe ask, how are they doing in relation to their peers? Or what is it going to take for them to improve their grades? You know, what is it going to take for my child to receive whatever service it is that you're looking for? This helps the ARD committee to brainstorm for solutions so that they have to come up with an answer. And I know sometimes parents feel that, you know, they feel rushed. There's no question that schools are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and my heart goes out to them. But maybe you need to say, I need to get my questions answered. Let's get through what we can, and then we can schedule a follow-up meeting. Because again, you don't want to sign something if your questions haven't been answered. So during the school year, make sure you keep in touch with your child's teachers. What I always used to do is every couple of weeks, just check in and make sure. Or if there was something that my child got a really low score on, and a perfect example was English. So Ryan reads beautifully. He's now 27 and his spelling is pretty good. But his comprehension and drawing conclusions and projects and things like that, they were never that great. I worked with him at home, the teacher worked with him, and it just wasn't working. So what happened is we had a meeting, and he then went into what we call co-teach classes, where the curriculum was modified and there's a teacher and an assistant teacher or an aide. And that worked much better for him. We tried to make it work in general education and it just wasn't working. So you want to make sure that you keep that communication going. Work together with your school to make sure that you address any concerns. Set up a communication system that works for you. Some people like folders, some prefer email. I'm a huge email person, and you want to make sure that, you know, you allow the teacher at least 2 or 3 days to get back to you. Teachers, again, they're under so much pressure, but at the same time, you don't want your child to fall far behind because it can be very challenging for them to catch up. And if the teacher isn't aware of your concerns, they can't address them. It's not like you'll be getting daily communication, but at least once a week, there should be some type of communication, especially if your child is falling behind. Check your child's backpack. And now I know they have everything online where you can check the different websites and what their homework assignments were. I never had that, but I know a lot of parents access that. And just make sure that you're keeping up with it so that you're not getting those 6-week grades and you see that your child is failing.
Yeah, and my son was nonverbal, so we did have a daily communication notebook. It wasn't elaborate. I didn't expect paragraphs, but if anything significant that I needed to know about, or if I needed to tell them something, like I'd write in there in the morning if Cameron didn't sleep the night before, so they would know why he may be acting differently. So you have to set up something that works for you and the teacher and your child.
And to let them know, Leslie's absolutely right. I've been divorced for over 20 years and I'm still a single parent. So I knew that if something was different in the schedule, the routine was not followed at their dad's, I made sure that I let them know that, because come Monday morning, it can be unsettling for them. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, document, document, document. And the reason that is so crucial is because say you're picking up your son early for a doctor's appointment, say you visit with your daughter in the school cafeteria and the teacher happens to mention they're going to do something, or maybe they give you a phone call. That's all okay. Just make sure that you follow up with an email and make sure that they have documented what it is that you told them, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. You really need to get all responses in writing, because if it's not written down, it may not happen. Teachers are trying to juggle so many students and so many tasks, and even they need reminders. So procedural safeguards, we talked about them on Monday, and it's very important. You should be getting those at least once a year. And it is regarding prior written notice. That's part of your procedural safeguards. So on page 2, it is law that whenever the school wants to propose or refuse to provide a service, they need to tell you in writing why that is happening. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but there is a link at the bottom for Texas Project First, and it gives you in both English and Spanish prior written notice, what it means, and why it is so important. Everything that is done regarding your child, you must give consent to. It can be an evaluation, some type of modification, some type of accommodation, but you, the parent, have the right to say yes or no. Next slide, please.
If they give you your procedural safeguards, they're giving those to you for a reason, so you know what to do if you don't agree. So it's really important. I know it can be overwhelming to read that, read a
Yes.
little bit, because I think when I finally read it, it was very eye-opening to me, some of the things that I didn't know.
And it's hard to remember everything. That's a great point, Leslie. We've been doing this for years, and we learn something new every single day. So make sure that you get educated. I've had parents that I talk to, and their child has a disability, and I don't know, it's just kind of a feeling that I get, and I'll say, well, do you understand what autism is and how it displays in your child? And they're like, not really. So then I'm explaining what autism is, or learning disabilities, things like that. Make sure that you understand what it is and how it manifests itself in your child. There's so many training classes, Family to Family Network. And if you're on Facebook, by the way, please make sure that you like our Facebook page. We always have training classes. There are district training classes. We have Region 4 Education Service Center. They have training classes. And there's so much out there in both English and Spanish to learn what your rights are. There's websites. And Facebook parenting groups can be helpful. Just remember that sometimes what people post, that was their experience. I have always said, and I believe it to this day, there is no such thing as a good or bad school district or school. It is how your child connects with the teacher and their peers in the class. That's what's really important. So again, getting educated and understanding what makes your child work best for them is very helpful. Make sure you use that ARD agenda to keep yourself organized during the meeting. You can print off the page, make sure they're following it. And again, we listed the link for that IEP agenda, that ARD agenda. And again, it's in both English and Spanish. So Texas Project First is really a great website, and you can use that as a tool to make sure that you understand special education. It includes your procedural safeguards. It includes everything that you would need to know to make sure that that ARD meeting is running successfully. Other websites that are really helpful are Parent Companion and the IDEA manual that we discussed earlier. Next slide, please. So organization, everybody organizes things differently. I used to have a binder that I would keep. Some people have like an accordion file. Some people are paperless these days, and they put everything through email and they have it scanned and it's in a folder. Whatever works best for you is great. Just make sure that you're keeping track of the IEPs, evaluations, report cards, emails. Make sure you're keeping all of that, logs of phone calls, things like that, because you want to be able to easily find things so that you know what is the most recent information about your child. Next slide, please. And Leslie, this is your part.
We're going to talk a lot about what you can do if you disagree tomorrow, but we just wanted to cover a little bit today. So I just want you to know that it's okay to disagree. I'm not saying disagree about every little thing, but if it's something important to your child's education, it's okay to disagree, but you have to take the next step and that's what your procedural safeguards are for. And in the IDEA handbook, there's a whole section about what you can do if you disagree. If you don't agree with the evaluation, you can request further evaluation, or you can request an independent evaluation at the school's expense. If you don't agree with the program or the services, if you can't come to an agreement in the meeting about something like that, you can write it down and it'll be part of the ARD document, your disagreement and what you're disagreeing about, or the diagnostician can put it in the minutes for you. Just read it before you sign off on anything. If you don't understand what's happening at the meeting, it might be good to disagree. So hopefully, if you don't understand and they're out of time, you can have a continuation ARD. But if they say they aren't going to do that, you can always disagree and then come back for a 10-day recess ARD. And it's really important to make a statement about your disagreement and have it reflected in the IEP, because if there's no statement of disagreement, then they may think you're agreeing with them. Before I start on tip 13, I also wanted to say, if you disagree and do nothing, that's the same thing as agreeing with them. Because if you don't use your procedural safeguards when you disagree, then they get to do what they feel is best. Tip 13, create a vision for your child. You know, the whole purpose of IDEA is to prepare the child for higher education and training, employment, and independent living. And that's going to look different for every child. But what is your vision and what's your child's vision for the future? Because that's going to direct the whole ARD committee and where they're going. So if you have a young child and they're already wanting to modify the curriculum, and your vision is for your child to go to college or community college, modifying the curriculum is not going to really put them on that path. And that's a very young age to start that. I'm not saying it's not needed for some students, but just know what your vision is. Like my vision for Cameron was to be able to live as independently as possible and be part of the community and never have to live in a state-supported living center or an institution. So that kind of directed the ARD committee and helped them understand everything that I was advocating for my son. And the IEP is sort of like a roadmap how to get to that destination. So if your child didn't have a disability, what would your expectations be, or what would your child's expectations be? You know, we do want it to be realistic, but just think of the IEP not only as a contract, but a map to get to where you're going. And, you know, if you have a clear vision about what you want for your child, that'll really help when the bus stops coming, because everything you're getting now in the public school or the charter school, you know, they have to provide. But once your child leaves public education, the colleges don't have to take them. The day program does not have to take your child if they don't have the skills that they need to get into that program. So it's really important to have a good vision, a clear vision for the future. You know,
And that's
everybody needs to sit down and think about their hopes and dreams for their child. Talk to your child if your child is verbal about what they hope to do and what their dreams are for after school. And I know if you have really little kids, you're probably not going to think about that right now, but everything can change from year to year. But every year as you make decisions at the meeting, you're mapping out a plan, hopefully with your child's assistance. And it really helps to take time and write down that vision. And it, like I said, it can change over the year, but it should help guide the whole IEP process.
And that's a really great point, Leslie, because oftentimes I'll get phone calls and the child is, well, actually now an adult, and maybe they're 19 and they graduated high school in May and they're calling me in August, like, what do we do now? And typically my first question is, just wanted you to know that if you have any younger children with disabilities, that technically your child can stay in school through age 21. And if they said, yes, we understand that, but, and then for whatever reason. But my next question is, what was discussed in your ARD meetings? What was the plan when your loved one graduated high school? And if they're calling me at age 22, asking me the same question, I'm going to then want to know, what was your child being prepared for? And if there isn't some plan in place, it's really hard to like scramble to do something now. It can be done and people do it all the time, but that's the purpose of those meetings. Thanks, Leslie.
That's really important. And when your child is around 14, you're going to have a transition plan as part of the IEP, and that's really important. And a lot of schools, a lot of ARD committees kind of just skim over it and put stuff in there that's not realistic. It should be realistic, but you should have high expectations because they're not going to let your child stay in school for the 18+ program if they have met all their goals. So
right.
You want to have goals and you want to have, and it's going to look very different for everybody. Like I needed to make sure in those last few years that Cameron could take care of all his bathroom needs. He could follow two-step directions. He had all of his behaviors in check, because if he didn't have that, we had a plan for him to go to a specific day hab program, and they didn't have to let him in if he didn't have all those things down. Now, he could have gone to another day hab program where they were basically babysitting, but that wasn't our vision. So that's just one example on one end of the spectrum. And I'm sure Judy could give an example about
Absolutely.
Ryan.
Thank you. So with Ryan, initially, I thought he was going to go to a junior college. And then once he was in high school, I'm thinking to myself, he really could care less. He's more about working. That's just him. So yes, he still got his diploma, but what we did is I had him doing different things to see where his interests were. So he was an office worker. He worked in the cafeteria during off hours and helped with portion cups and bagging chips and being like a food assistant worker, if you will. So originally we would talk about some type of junior college, but then it switched to employment. So he actually stayed a 5th year at his current high school. And then he went into a 18+ program for a year. And that worked out really well because they did different internships and things like that. And then he ended up getting a job from one of those internships. So, you know, it's fine if the goals change. Just remember that no child ever rises to low expectations. And we have to have high expectations because I believe that everyone can do something in this world. We have to come together as communities, as schools, as employers to give the right supports so that our loved ones can succeed. So now we're going to switch a little bit, and Leslie's going to talk about Medicaid waiver programs. And we just wanted to mention this because they're so important, and we're not going to go over all of them for the sake of time, but we want to make sure that you have this information to make sure that your loved one is set up for these programs.
So if you don't do anything else this week, if your child's not on the interest list for the Medicaid waiver programs, and I know a lot of people hear the word Medicaid and don't think their child's going to qualify, they don't look at the family's income. They only look at the child's income. So just get on the waiting list. It's very easy to do. You can be on multiple waiting lists at one time, but the wait is 15 to 20 years. And when your child finally gets these services, when their name comes to the top of the list, if you don't need them, you just say no, thank you. But if you do need them, you don't want to be waiting another 15 years. And the program, these Medicaid waiver programs are life-changing. And plus they also help provide services for when the parents are no longer around. So definitely get on the waiting list. If you move or change your phone number, you have to let them know. We have several different Medicaid waivers in Texas. So get on all of the waiting lists that you think might apply. And then we're going to give you all the information to do that. And you can learn more about each program. This is a great document that does a side-by-side comparison. And, you know, Cameron came up on the class Medicaid waiver first. So of course we accepted it. And several years later, he came up on the HCS waiver program. And then we had to look at all the components of each program and decide which one to stay on. So there's also the MDCP, which is the medically dependent children's waiver, the deaf-blind waiver, the YES waiver for kids that have mental health issues. Navigate Life is another website that Family to Family worked on for the Health and Human Services Department. Lots of great information there. You can find out there's even some good little videos about that kind of explain the waivers. I highly recommend you go there. You can also search any topic there and you're going to find information written by other parents who have already been there and done that. And I think that's so helpful to get easy to understand information from other parents. So here's a list of all the waivers and the numbers to call if you have any trouble with that. Because like HCS waiver, it's by your county. So like if your county's not Harris County or Fort Bend County, we can help you look that up. And then last is please take our survey because the survey is so important. We need to know what we're doing good and what we could do better. And this also helps us get funding for grants so we can continue to provide trainings like this.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And I'm going to put the link in the chat box as well. I am not QR code savvy, so that is not my area of strength, technology, but you can also scan the QR code. But I put it in the chat box and you can click on the link. So it is my hope that I see the surveys by the end of the day. It takes just a minute. So I want to go through what we had in the chat box. Leslie, thank you so much. So let me find my chat box. Hold on one second. Okay, so I think we answered some of the questions. Does everyone understand the difference between the ARD and the IEP meeting? The ARD meeting, ARD stands for Admission, Review, Dismissal. The IEP is the individualized education plan that is discussed in that ARD meeting. So yes, that IEP plan does include, or can include, I should say, behavior implementation amendments. And keep in mind that if your child is having some behavior challenges, like a lot of times parents will say, oh, my child doesn't communicate. Well, they communicate. They just might do it through their behavior. And if they're nonverbal, then you definitely need to have an adaptive technology evaluation done for your child, because there is so much technology that benefits our students, our teachers, and our families. So
Judy, somebody
Yes.
said they don't know the terminology. If you get that IDEA handbook, parent
Yep.
manual, they have all the acronyms and exactly what they mean.
Perfect. No, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah. And I believe the Texas Project First website also has it.
I think so.
Yeah, this is an area where, they use so many abbreviations, and it's very frustrating when you don't know it. So it's important to try to learn as much as you can, or create a little cheat sheet for yourself so that you have it. We talked about asking for those documents a few days ahead of your ARD meeting. So what you're asking for is, can you just have a draft copy of the IEP that's going to be discussed in the meeting? If you agree with everything, great. Then you can sign it during the meeting. But if you don't, you want to make sure that you've taken notes and that you've written down questions so that you can find out the answers to your question. So this is really a great point. Someone brought up anonymously, what if your child doesn't cooperate with part of the testing? And you're right, parent, that can be very challenging. Sometimes they may have to come back. Maybe your child is about to get a cold. Maybe they don't feel well. Maybe they're just having an off day. We all have days like that. So what you want to do is see if they can come back another day to test your child. Hopefully they can get some kind of baseline information, because that's how they're going to draft those goals. That's how they're going to come up with objectives for your child. But if they didn't cooperate one time, every child has off days, and hopefully they're coming back again to make sure that your child is getting the proper testing completed.
So when my son was young too, they asked me a lot of questions because he wasn't very cooperative. And so I was able to give them enough information to help them. They did an IQ test. It was a verbal IQ test. My son was nonverbal, so it wasn't really a good measure of his IQ. And that's fine, because a lot of times when they see a low IQ at a young age, they set the bar real low. So I wasn't really worried about that too much, except I wish I would have known they didn't give him the right evaluation. But yeah, they should ask you. You are the most important person that can give them so much information about what do you do at home and how do you do it and how do you get him to show you what he or she they know. So
yeah, and I think that's a really great point, Leslie, that they may ask you the questions if your child is not cooperating.
When they're very young, a lot of the assessments have a parent interview part. Another thing is maybe you need to get an independent evaluation. Maybe somebody else could do a better job at getting more out of them. So it's always good to get a second opinion, whether you pay for that out of pocket or with your own insurance, or you ask the school to pay for an IEE, which they do have to do if you ask for that.
Yeah, if you disagree with their findings, or they're not able to get the findings, remember when I was talking earlier about that connection that your child makes? It's the same with the person who's evaluating them. They have to make that connection.
Or maybe they let them go ahead and go to school and, give accommodations based on what you've told them. And after they're familiar with the teacher and their surroundings, maybe they try again, the next year to get a better evaluation too. So there's lots of ways you can go about getting a good evaluation.
So if you've had a lot of school issues with the school district, I see that someone wrote, can you request, and with who do you request the case manager to be changed? So, say you're probably working with the special education chairperson. Well, they are who they are, but maybe there can be another point of contact for you. Sometimes people just don't mix very well, and that's really hard, and it's very challenging. So maybe you just work with your teacher. Maybe you work with the speech therapist at the school or the assistant principal. It's not so much that you can really ask someone to be changed, because that might be their primary role and their primary job at the school, but maybe there's just someone you can communicate with more. And if I didn't answer that correctly, please email me and I'd be happy to discuss it with you, and maybe we can brainstorm someone else. So does your child have to be a certain age for an adaptive technology evaluation? Great question. Nope. It's amazing. I've seen, 1-year-olds, playing with things. It's amazing what they can do. You just have to know to ask for it if the school isn't mentioning it to you. So I'm glad you asked that question. Go ahead, Lynn.
Put your request in writing. Another
Absolutely.
reason I love the IDEA manual is they have sample letters.
Mhm.
And so that would fall under you asking for further evaluation. And, assistive technology is not just devices. It could be, at first, my son was using a picture symbol system. And then once he was able to do that, then they transitioned him to a voice output device. It could just be a Big Mac on the table to at least let them, a way to let a child say, I need to go to the bathroom. So it can look like a lot of different things, but you do want to ask for a formal, comprehensive assistive technology evaluation, because it's going to be a team of people. I think when Cameron had his, it was the diagnostician, an OT, and the speech path. So we're not just talking about, there's a big difference in formal evaluations and informal. So make sure you know what you're getting.
So I'm really glad you asked that question. Thank you. How long should the school take before they do the reevaluation that's due every 3 years?
Can I answer that, Judy?
Absolutely.
Okay, so your child is entitled to a new formal evaluation not more than once a year, but they are required by law to at least do it every 3 years. Anytime they do an evaluation, the read, which is not a new evaluation, it's old information updated. The read is the first part of the evaluation. But as far as the 3-year reeval, if it's been 3 years, they have to have that completed by that evaluation date. So if they haven't, they're out of compliance with the Texas Education Agency. So they shouldn't be going past 3 years. Now, a lot of times parents will agree to the read and not doing any new formal evaluation. That resets your 3-year reeval. So let's say it's been 3 years, they do a read. and they say, we really don't need any new information, you can say if you want to. But if they just do a read and you agree to it, that resets to, then you don't have another one for 3 years unless in a year from now, something comes up, maybe your child's making a lot of progress or not making progress, or maybe there's other problems. You can always ask for new formal evaluation in areas not more than once a year.
Glad you asked that. So I got another private message that they had a previous diagnosis of an intellectual disability and the school is not honoring this on the current evaluation. So if you want to email either Leslie or myself, we'd be happy to discuss this with you, because again, the reason you have these meetings and the reason the ARD minutes are agreed upon is because the committee is supposed to make sure that everything is being honored and the accommodations or modifications are being carried through. So I think I covered everything.
I got one privately.
Sure.
So if your child's in resource classes for certain subjects, are we allowed to get the teacher's email that will be working with the child individually so we can get weekly updates and a comparison of where the general ed curriculum is at? So yeah, I mean, you should be, most schools you can find, you definitely want to know teachers' names, especially in this day and age, because there's such a shortage for teachers. The other day I had someone give me their teacher's name and I looked them up on the State Board of Education. You can look up teachers and paras to see if they do have an appropriate license for what they're teaching. And so if you have their name, you can look them up. But yeah, it's important to have their email address so you
Absolutely.
can.
I live for email.
And usually you can find them on the school's website, but
Absolutely.
if you call up the school and ask for, you know, the teacher's email address, that's another important thing when we were talking about documenting. So if I email a teacher and she doesn't respond to my email, you know, we always want to give them the benefit of doubt. So I might, after a few days, I'm going to forward that email to her and say, hey, did you see my email below with questions? Can you please respond? And then if she doesn't do it after that time, I'm going to forward it again and say, and I'm going to copy somebody above her head, like the case manager or the special ed chair or the principal, and say, hey, I've sent 2 emails and nobody's responding. And that'll get their attention. Excuse me.
And sometimes I'll never forget one time, a teacher was out on medical leave and her email wasn't working right. Well, that made more sense to me. I didn't know. And my son, of course, didn't tell me. So I then realized who I was supposed to email. So, you know, there could be a reason and you just have to find out.
There's another private email to message about assistive technology. I don't think they're going to do a comprehensive assistive technology on your child in most cases unless you request it. And then again, I would ask you to please put your request in writing. And that's why those sample letters are so great in the IDEA handbook. They're sample letters, you have to fix them to meet, you know, your child or whatever. But yeah, they're not obligated to do every evaluation if they don't see a need for it or if the parent hasn't requested, but you can always ask for it. If you do ask for it in writing, they do have to do it. Of course, if it's not part of the initial evaluation, the timelines don't apply. So make sure when you ask for it and they get you to sign consent to do the eval, because they always have to get consent. talk to them and say, okay, when is it going to happen? When can I expect to have the report? Because once you do that, you're going to have an ARD meeting to go over the results. Of course, you want to get a copy of the results before you go to the ARD meeting. And so, yeah, definitely. It's not just, it doesn't always just happen. Just like I know a lot of students who have, for instance, Down syndrome, and maybe they didn't do an OT evaluation as part of the initial evaluation, and maybe the parents didn't know to ask for that. You can always ask for that later. So yeah, just put your request in writing. And yes, every child should have a case manager. They may not call it that.
No, yeah, they're not, I never did.
Yeah, so, but it's a case manager in, you know, for our school to oversee school. I don't want you to think of it as a case manager like you would have for one of the Medicaid waivers or a health insurance or something like that. But yes, there should be a case manager that oversees your child's case. And it could, like Judy had said earlier, it could be the speech, like Cameron got a lot of speech therapy. So the speech therapist, I guess they kind of divided it up between.
They did, and we had the special ed chairperson, but case manager, I never saw. It was somebody else who did it.
Right, that they just called them so that each student in special ed is going to have a case manager. It just might, like, I guess when Cameron was in high school, it wasn't the speech therapist, it was the special ed chair. In middle school, I think it was his special education teacher that had him a large part of the time. So it could be any of that. I mean, you could always request if things aren't going well, you know, talk to the special ed chair and say, you know, I'm really not getting what I need from my case manager. It's really good to communicate. We always want to be nice. We want to work together. You know, I'd have a conversation, but if you do have a conversation, you know, some things are hard to do in email, but after you have a conversation, you know, follow up with an email. As per our conversation today, I talked to you about changing my son's case manager, you know, because we weren't getting what we needed or whatever specific information you want to put in there. And as per our conversation today, I understood you to say that this was going to happen, or, you know, if it doesn't happen, you know, you could always readdress it in an ARD meeting. And, you know, if they say no to something outside of an ARD meeting, readdress it in the ARD meeting, because if it's important enough, then you can disagree and use your procedural safeguards. You know, of course, we don't want to be disagreeing about every little thing, and we do want to work with them, but yeah, try to
Evan, you raised your hand?
Yes, Nicole raised her hand. I asked about the case. I have to go because they're waiting for me at the front. I'm at work. I have a question about the case manager because my son is only 5 years old, but there have been allegations on Halloween when I picked him up of the case manager. I got a call that they have to, I don't know what the proper word is, when you have to put your hands on a child, restrain. And I got allegations from my son that this case manager put her hands on him before he decided to do likewise. Mind you, he's only 5. So I called and went online to the Humble ISD thing, and I called and I left a message and never got a call back from the director or anyone. So that Friday of that week of Halloween, I called HPD. Because it was done in the school, I ended up calling the school and making an official report, because I come from a federal background, and if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
Right.
And the school has not yet told me anything in the emails where I'm requesting for her to not be around my son whatsoever. So I'm having issues with that. The PCP has been advised. I took pictures, I took videos, and I don't know what else to do, because like you said, like a single mother, and we are number 2 in veteran female population here in Houston, Texas, and I'm a female veteran. It is very difficult to handle that, especially when someone else puts their hands on your child.
So
So
they put and why did they put their hands on your child?
apparently the word was that he was at breakfast, and when they were getting ready to go into the classroom, my son did not want to go to the classroom. He was upset about some type of game they were playing in the cafeteria with the other children. So
Okay.
apparently the report says that the restraint was put to get him to cool down, and they put him in a room, which I don't agree with, and
Mhm.
apparently restrained him because he didn't want to go into the room. And the case manager said that she was cornered, her words, which I have recorded, and the 5-year-old slapped her.
Hmm. If you could, please email me. I have a contact at the school district, and I'm happy to connect you with them if you would like.
Yes, if it's okay, I can email you this afternoon. They're waiting for
Absolutely,
me up
whenever
front.
it is convenient for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Another thing about that is immediately you should ask for a formal functional behavioral assessment. You want to make sure you've requested cameras. I know this didn't happen in the special education classroom, but if you request cameras in the special education classroom, they have to provide them. They probably have cameras in the cafeteria where it happened. I would request that too. I do everything in writing, and they definitely should do a functional behavioral assessment, a formal one by an LSSP or a BCBA, somebody trained in behavior, so they can observe, because a lot of behaviors are triggered by something that somebody
Exactly.
else
They
does.
denied me the BCBA in the ARD.
Okay, so who's going to do the functional behavioral assessment?
They want the LSSP, but I don't want that LSSP because I
Okay.
requested the LSSP when he was in PK4 for that and other stuff. And they told me that I had to wait till he was in kinder, and he started kinder with a bang, and every day
Oh,
from school.
Yeah,
we
and
need to talk,
that's
yeah.
another point to make is they shouldn't be calling you to pick up your child
No.
from school. If they can't provide a free and appropriate education, then they need to pay for a private education. So,
But I'll follow up with an email, and definitely
Please.
would
Yeah, we know you have to
appreciate
go.
any advocacy to help us
Absolutely.
females.
Thank
And
you for
I will
joining
pass
us.
this on. All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
I
you
have a
all so
question.
much for joining us.